Seattle had always been a city of contradictions, steel blue skies brushing against the damp edges of concrete streets, tech dreams rising alongside people who feared being left behind. Evan Carter knew that contradiction better than anyone. For years, he had walked to work through South Lake Union with a quiet pride, feeling that he was part of something meaningful at Helix Soft, the mid-sized tech firm that had given him a place to belong. But now, as he stared at the severance letter crumpled on the kitchen table, the hum of rain outside felt like a muted warning. Life was shifting in ways he could not stop. The apartment he shared with his wife, Lena Moore, was small but warm, filled with muted colors she chose because, as she often said, Evan didn't really care about decorating. And it was true. He wasn't a man of surfaces. He cared about the things underneath, the things that lasted. Today, he wasn't sure anything lasted at all. Lena was standing by the window, scrolling on her phone, the cold glow reflecting across her cheekbones. Their silence had stretched for hours. She finally spoke without turning around. "So what now?" Her tone was flat, a practiced neutrality that came from months of burying resentment. "I'm applying everywhere," Evan said. "Startups, remote jobs, contract work. Something will come through." He tried to sound steady, but even he could hear how thin his voice was. Lena lowered her phone, her eyes sharp as they landed on the severance letter. "We can't afford to wait and see. Not in Seattle. Rent is due in 2 weeks." "I know. I'm not ignoring it." He swallowed. "Just give me time." She exhaled sharply. "Time is what you've had too much of." The words stung. He tried to ignore it. "I've always been the one paying most of the bills. That was before." She crossed her arms. "Evan, I didn't marry someone who was comfortable being stagnant." He stared at her, confused. "I'm not stagnant. I just hit a setback." Lena turned away, but not fast enough to hide the impatience cutting across her face. She had always been ambitious, always looking upward. He admired that about her once. But lately her ambition had grown sharp edges, carving them apart with silent judgment. The crack between them widened that night, not with a dramatic fight, but with the quiet weight of unspoken disappointments. Over the next weeks, Evan tried everything. Coding tests, interviews, freelance gigs, nothing stuck. The tech layoffs were brutal that year. Thousands were competing for the same few jobs. Lena became harder to reach emotionally. She spent more evenings meeting clients for her marketing firm, returning home with makeup slightly smudged, smelling faintly of a different cologne. Evan noticed, and the noticing hurt. One evening, he found her laughing on the phone in the living room, something she hadn't done with him in months. When she saw Evan, she went silent, ending the call quickly. He tried to smile. "Who was that?" "A client." Her jaw tightened as she brushed past him. "You don't need to question me." He wanted to believe her. He tried. But loneliness had a way of sharpening instincts. The truth came out 2 weeks later. Evan was returning early from an unsuccessful interview when he saw Lena standing outside their building with a man he had never met. Tall, designer suit, confident in the way of someone who had never been afraid of losing anything. They weren't kissing. But the way Lena laughed, head tilted, hand brushing his arm, was something more intimate than a kiss. Something deeper. Something Evan had once been the center of. Lena froze when she noticed Evan. The man excused himself with a polite nod, stepping into a waiting black car. Inside the apartment, silence pressed between them until Lena finally said, "We need to talk." He already knew. "You're seeing him," Evan said quietly. She didn't deny it. "His name is Grant, and he understands me, Evan. He has goals. He's going somewhere. I can't stay trapped in this life." "This life? With me?" Lena's eyes glimmered with something cold. "You don't even know who you want to be anymore." He felt something inside him break, not loudly, but with the soft, devastating sound of trust collapsing. The divorce wasn't messy. The emotional damage already had been done long before the papers were signed. Lena moved into an upscale condo downtown. Evan moved into a smaller apartment further north, far from places they once shared. People whispered. Rumors spread. And Lena did nothing to stop them. Sometimes, she even added to them. He was too soft, she told mutual acquaintances. He lacked drive. I can't build a future with someone who refuses to aim higher. Evan heard fragments of these conversations. Each one cut, but he let them go. In losing her, he realized he had been losing himself long before. So he disappeared. He deleted social media, blocked people who only reached out of curiosity, and quietly, he dove into a small AI startup where his old research unexpectedly became the foundation of their most promising project. Work became his refuge, his rebuilding. And while Seattle moved on, no one knew the storm that was quietly forming, one that would rise months later, at a wedding neither Lena nor her guests would ever forget. The weeks after the divorce passed in a strange kind of quiet, one that felt both suffocating and merciful. Evan Carter spent most of his days inside a modest co-working space in Fremont, a glass-walled building overlooking the canal where rowers glided by each morning. He chose the corner table near the window, partly for the natural light, partly because he needed to feel the world moving even when he felt suspended in place. The silence wasn't empty. It carried echoes, the soft scrape of Lena packing her things, the final click of the door when she left for the last time. Her voice sharp, tired, disappointed, looping through his mind at the most unexpected moments. The echoes came without warning, like aftershocks that refused to fade. But work steadied him. The startup Neuralink Dynamics was nothing like the polished corporate world he had known. It smelled faintly of burnt coffee and whiteboard markers, and the team of 12 shared one restless ambition: to build an adaptive AI engine that could anticipate user intent before commands were even made. The kind of technology Evan had once sketched in old notebooks during late-night bursts of inspiration Lena used to tease him about. Now, those sketches sat open in front of him daily, fueling something he had not felt in months: the faint, flickering outline of purpose. He wasn't trying to rise, not yet. Survival was enough. But the startup's founder, Mia Patel, a sharp, steady woman in her late 30s, noticed the way Evan worked like a man trying to outrun ghosts. One evening, long after everyone else had left, Mia stood by his desk, arms crossed gently. "You've been here 13 hours, she said. Again." Evan didn't look up from his screen. The predictive memory module keeps misfiring on edge cases. "If I can rewrite the access layer," Evan, Mia interrupted, but not unkindly, "the code will still be here in the morning." He finally leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "I know. I need this to work." Mia studied him for a long moment. She had seen this before in founders burning through their last savings, in engineers fighting for a sense of worth after being laid off, in people trying to rebuild something shattered. She recognized the desperation disguised as dedication. "Whatever you're running from," she said quietly, "it won't disappear just because the algorithm improves." He didn't answer, but the truth sat heavy between them. That night, walking back to his small apartment, the city felt colder. Not in temperature, but in the way the world carried on, indifferent to anyone's private battles. Streetlights washed the sidewalks in pale gold. Couples hurried past him, laughing. Restaurants buzzed with the glow of Friday night energy. He used to share Friday nights with Lena. Sometimes they stayed home with cheap wine and takeout. Sometimes they walked to the waterfront, sharing stories about work, dreams, fears. Those nights felt simple in a way he didn't realize was fragile. Now those memories felt like scenes from an old film he had once loved but could no longer watch. In the apartment, his phone buzzed. A notification from an old mutual friend he hadn't heard from in months, Andrew, who always loved gossip more than people. He opened the message reluctantly. Saw Lena downtown. She looks expensive. Heard she's engaged to that business guy. They're flaunting everything like crazy. People say you're still struggling. Sorry, man. Evan stared at the screen. Not angry, not jealous, just tired. He typed no reply. The truth was simpler. Lena had moved forward. He wasn't sure he had. At Neuralink, progress came in bursts. Some days, a breakthrough made the office electric cheers echoing down the hallway, whiteboards filled with diagrams, the team devouring cheap tacos at midnight. Other days, silence filled the room, frustration thick as fog. Evan lived for the breakthroughs. One afternoon, after debugging a particularly stubborn segment, he leaned back with a rare smile. The engine finally achieved a 92% adaptive success rate, numbers that investors would pay attention to. Mia walked by and raised an eyebrow. Is that an expression of joy? Possibly, Evan said. Should we start a company Slack channel to commemorate the moment? He shook his head, though a faint laugh escaped him. The warmth surprised him. So did the realization that laughter hadn't felt foreign. For the first time since the divorce, Evan felt the slightest expansion inside his chest. Not hope, not yet, but space. Meanwhile, across the city, Lena Moore lived a life carved from marble and mirrors. She posted photos of champagne dinners and rooftop views, careful angles designed to capture what she wanted the world to believe, that she had moved upward, chosen better, found the life she deserved. Her engagement ring, courtesy of Grant, sparkled under the soft glow of every Instagram filter she used. The comments flooded in. So happy for you. You deserve the best. Upgrade! She liked every comment, sometimes twice. But beneath the curated gloss, the truth was more complicated. Grant's business ventures were volatile. There were late-night calls filled with stress, emails about funding gaps, meetings with investors that didn't go well. He hid the cracks well in public, but not from Lena. And while she had traded love for security, she discovered security wasn't guaranteed. Still, she reassured herself. Grant was ambitious. Grant was connected. Grant was nothing like Evan. To Lena, the worst thing that could happen was appearing to have chosen wrong twice. Months passed. Neuralink grew. Investors began circling. And one chilly November morning, Mia called Evan into her office. We have an acquisition offer, she said. Evan blinked. From who? Auratech. They want to buy us before we launch. She paused. And they're offering equity cash outs for the senior engineers. He sat there silent as the reality formed around him. Cash outs, life-changing money, a future he thought he had lost forever. Mia studied him again, the way she had the night she told him the code would still be there in the morning. You earned this, she said. He wasn't sure whether she meant the success or the second chance. And somewhere across Seattle, inside a high-rise bridal suite, where Lena was finalizing wedding seating arrangements, her phone lit up with the headline she didn't yet realize would unravel everything. Auratech acquires Neuralink for $340 million, led architect named Evan Carter. She froze. The room tilted, and for the first time in a very long time, Lena Moore felt fear. The bridal suite on the 32nd floor overlooked downtown Seattle glass towers, rising like polished monoliths against a washed-out winter sky. The room smelled of orchids, perfume, and the faint, sweet tang of expensive champagne. Everything was curated to perfection, from the ivory lace gown draped across a mannequin to the gold-rimmed wedding invitation spread on the marble table. But none of that mattered the moment Lena Moore saw Evan's name in the headline. She reread it once, twice, a third time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Evan Carter. Lead architect Neuralink Dynamics, acquired by Oratech for $340 million. Her hand trembled. The phone slipped slightly, and she caught it just before it hit the floor. It felt like a mistake, like an algorithm glitch. Evan couldn't be involved in something of this scale. Not Evan, who couldn't keep up with rent. Not Evan, who wore clearance rack shirts and didn't care about networking. Not the man she walked away from because he couldn't offer the life she wanted. Her maid of honor, Sabrina Hale, looked up from a pile of wedding favors. "You okay?" Lena forced a breath. I just saw something." "Bad?" She hesitated. "Unexpected." Sabrina shrugged, used to Lena's dramatics. "Well, don't spiral today, okay? Tomorrow, you're marrying a man every woman in the city wants." Lena offered a brittle smile. Sabrina didn't know the truth. No one did. Not about Grant's unstable finances. Not about his quietly ballooning debt. Not about the investor who walked away last week. Lena kept all of that buried under designer makeup and digital filters. But now? This headline pierced right through all of it. The man she had mocked, dismissed, and left had risen, not socially, not superficially, but in real, undeniable substance. Her heart pounded. She told herself it was shock, not regret. Though some regrets don't announce themselves, they simmer, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Across town, Evan sat inside a dimly lit office, staring at the contract he had just signed. Reporters had been calling non-stop. LinkedIn requests multiplied by the minute. Former coworkers he hadn't heard from in years were suddenly so proud of him. He ignored most of it. Mia stood by the window, arms folded, watching him carefully. "You look like someone waiting for bad news, not someone whose work just changed his life." Evan exhaled. "It's just a lot. Fast." "You earned it." She paused. "You know that, right?" "Yes." But the word felt shaky in his throat. Success was easier to bear than heartbreak, but it carried its own weight, especially when it came after losing everything he thought he needed. He opened his laptop. More emails flooded in. "Congratulations! Incredible news! We always knew you were brilliant," from people who never truly saw him when he was struggling. He scrolled again, pausing on a short, simple message. "Hi, Evan. Heard the news. Proud of you. Andrew." Not long ago, Andrew texted pity. Now he texted admiration. The shift felt hollow. Evan deleted the message. What he didn't delete was the quiet voice inside him asking why his chest felt heavier instead of lighter. He thought of Lena, not with longing, but with a faint ache of something unresolved. She didn't know this version of him, the one rediscovering purpose, steadiness, ambition without desperation. But he knew she would find out eventually. News traveled fast in a city that thrived on whispered fortunes. By late afternoon, the engagement party scheduled for that evening was already causing chaos in Lena's suite. Makeup artists rushed in. Florists argued over centerpiece heights. Sabrina rehearsed her maid of honor speech. But Lena sat motionless at the vanity mirror. Her phone dimmed on the counter. Grant entered the room with his practiced, confident smile, the one he wore in public but never at home anymore. "There's my bride, Jim," he said, kissing her cheek. "You look pale. Too much champagne?" Lena shook her head. "I'm fine." He didn't notice the tension in her shoulders. Or maybe he did and chose not to care. His mind was elsewhere, on the investors he still hadn't secured, on the accounts that weren't balancing, on the company he insisted was on the verge of a breakthrough. "How was the call with Jonathan?" Lena asked quietly. Grant's jaw tightened. "He needs more time." That meant he said no. "Grant," she said carefully, "the wedding is tomorrow. If there's something I need to know, there isn't." His smile hardened. "We're fine." but the veneer cracked when he looked away, rubbing his temples. Stress hung around him like smoke. Lena suddenly felt the room closing in. She used to believe money meant certainty, stability, a life without fear. Yet here she was hours before her wedding, feeling the old dread return. And beneath that dread, a sharper fear bloomed. If Evan had succeeded, if Evan had found his way, then maybe she didn't leave a loser. Maybe she left someone she never truly understood. The thought twisted inside her. Evening came. The engagement party sparkled with gold lights and champagne fountains. Photographers drifted between guests. Everything looked perfect. And yet, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something enormous had shifted beneath her feet like a tectonic plate moving slowly, silently, about to split her world in two. Midway through the event, she slipped out onto the balcony, gripping the railing as the city lights shimmered below. Her phone buzzed. A new notification. A photo of Evan in a news article, calm, composed, speaking at the acquisition announcement. Wearing a suit that fit him, standing among executives, confident in a way she had never seen. She zoomed in. His eyes were steadier, his posture stronger. He looked free. And that more than the money, the technology, the headlines unsettled her, because freedom was the one thing she had never allowed him. Freedom from her expectations, her criticisms, her quiet disdain. Sabrina stepped onto the balcony. "The guests are asking for you." Lena's throat tightened. "I'll be there in a moment." Sabrina studied her with concern. "You sure you're okay?" Lena straightened her shoulders. "I'm marrying Grant tomorrow. Everything is fine." Her voice sounded confident. Too confident, because something inside her whispered the truth. Everything was not fine. Her past had returned not to seek revenge, but simply to exist, unbothered by the woman who once broke him. And that, to Lena Moore, was the most unbearable punishment of all. The morning of the wedding arrived with a brittle kind of brightness, sunlight pressed thinly through a layer of winter haze, casting the city in a muted gold that felt more like a warning than a blessing. Seattle looked quiet from the penthouse suite, but inside the room, tension pulsed beneath every movement. Lena Moore sat in front of the vanity, wrapped in a white silk robe, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The makeup artist tried to work around her stiffness, brushing foundation across skin that felt colder than usual. Every stroke seemed to skim the surface of a woman trying to hold herself together by sheer force of will. Her mind kept flickering back to the article, to Evan's name, to the man she once dismissed as a burden now standing in a world she fought her entire life to enter. She kept hearing his voice in her head, soft, steady, infuriatingly patient. The voice she once used to love. The voice she used to underestimate. Outside the suite, wedding planners moved like organized chaos, heels clicking, radios buzzing, assistants rushing up and down the hallway. The hotel smelled of fresh roses, polished chrome, and expensive fabric steamers. Everything looked flawless, except Lena. The makeup artist paused. "Sweetheart, your hands are shaking." Lena forced a smile. "Just nerves." The artist wasn't convinced, but continued working. Across Seattle, Evan Carter woke up at 7:12 a.m. to a rare stillness. Pale morning light filtered through the thin curtains of his apartment. For once, he didn't wake tangled in thoughts of the past. Or at least, not as deeply. He made coffee black. Simple. His phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages. He ignored most of them and opened his laptop instead, skimming through the last round of code reviews he needed to finish before the transition meeting with Oratech next week. But he couldn't ignore the awareness pressing in the back of his mind. Today was Lena's wedding day. He hadn't been invited, of course. He wasn't supposed to matter. He wasn't supposed to be part of her world anymore. And yet, he felt the faint ache of something unresolved, less longing, more curiosity, not for her, but for who he used to be when he was with her. He wondered if she knew about the acquisition yet. He wondered if she cared. He wondered if he still cared. His coffee turned cold before he took a single sip. Back at the hotel, the groom paced the hallway outside the suite, his phone pressed to his ear. Grant Wallace looked immaculate in his tailored charcoal tuxedo, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "No, I told you delay isn't an option," he hissed into the receiver. "We need that wire before noon." A pause. Grant's expression darkened. "I don't want excuses. Fix it." He hung up, slipping the phone into his pocket just as the wedding planner approached. "Grant, everything okay?" "Fine," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just business." But the planner noticed his hands tightening into fists. When he entered the bridal suite, Lena caught the shift immediately. "You're stressed," she said. He shook his head. "Everything's under control." She started to speak, but he leaned down, brushing a kiss against her temple. "You look beautiful," he murmured. It was the right thing to say. But the warmth didn't reach her. She felt only the tremor beneath the veneer. Grant stepped into the adjoining room to take another call. Lena's eyes followed him. And for the first time, she wondered if she truly knew the man she had chosen. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. at the Grand Hall Ballroom, gold chandeliers, mirrored walls, and a string quartet warming up in the corner. Guests began arriving early. Investors, influencers, people who cared more about appearance than connection. They carried glossy gifts and wider smiles. Several guests whispered already, "Did you see the news? That startup acquisition, unbelievable. The lead architect used to be her ex-husband, right? Awkward timing. Do you think she knew?" Lena heard fragments as she walked toward the photo area. The words clung to her like static. Sabrina appeared beside her. "Ignore them. People always talk." But Lena couldn't ignore the shift in tone, the curious glances lingering a second too long. They weren't mocking her, not yet, but they were studying her now, recalculating. Sabrina squeezed her hand. "Grant loves you. That's what matters." Lena exhaled slowly. "Yes, of course." But the words rang hollow. At noon, Evan received an email from Oratech inviting him to an industry event happening tonight at the same hotel hosting Lena's wedding. A coincidence. An uncomfortable one. He stared at the screen. Logic said, "Decline." Instinct whispered, "Go." Closure murmured, "You have every right to exist in the same city, the same building, the same moment." He closed the laptop. He showered, shaved, chose a black tuxedo that Mia insisted he buy for future events. He never imagined the future event would be this one. When he looked in the mirror, for the first time in years, he didn't see the man Lena once belittled. He saw someone who had survived himself. He left his apartment at 3:20 p.m. At the hotel, Lena stood alone in the bridal suite, her gown cascading around her like liquid ivory. Her hair was pinned perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked like a woman who had everything she once wanted, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Grant entered quietly. "Ready?" he asked. She hesitated. "Are you?" He smiled, thin, brittle. "Absolutely." Another lie. They were both full of them today. A knock sounded at the door. 5 minutes, the coordinator said. 5 minutes until she walked down the aisle. 5 minutes until she sealed her choice. 5 minutes until she pretended everything was fine. Lena turned toward the mirror. And for the first time, she asked herself a question she had avoided for months. What if I was wrong? The thought sliced through her like ice. She pressed a hand against her ribs, trying to steady her breath. Then, Somewhere far below the suite, the lobby doors opened, and Evan stepped into the hotel. The lobby of the Grand Hall Hotel shimmered under towering crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of orchids flown in from Hawaii for the wedding. Guests drifted through the marble foyer, laughter, perfume, and designer fabrics swaying with every turn. It was a world built on impressions, curated like a gallery where status mattered more than sincerity. Evan Carter stepped into that world with a quiet, steady composure. The polished floor reflected the clean lines of his black tuxedo. His hair was neatly styled, shoes gleaming, shoulders relaxed in a way they never were when he was with Lena. He carried no resentment, no bitterness, only the calm confidence of a man who had learned to breathe again. He checked in with the event staff for the Oratech reception being held upstairs. They directed him toward the elevators. He thanked them politely, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the other ballroom, the one adorned with white roses and gold ribbons. Lena's wedding. He hadn't come for her. He repeated the truth to himself. I am here for my life, not my past. Still, the past had a way of breathing through the same corridors. As he walked toward the elevator, a pair of older guests stepped out of the wedding hall, talking loudly enough for their words to trail through the air. I heard the groom's deal fell through. Disastrous timing. And did you see the article about her ex? Unbelievable, right? She really miscalculated. Evan kept walking. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't want to be part of this narrative. But the world had a way of stitching stories together whether people wanted it or not. Upstairs, Lena stood in the bridal suite, veil pinned delicately over her hair. Guests were already seated. The string quartet played a soft prelude. The officiant waited patiently. Grant paced near the window. His phone buzzed non-stop. He ignored every call. You're making me nervous, Lena said quietly. I'm handling something, he said. That's not comforting. He turned, forcing a smile. Everything is fine. But she noticed the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the tension hiding beneath his jawline. She had wanted a man who looked powerful in a suit. She hadn't considered how powerless a man could look in one when the truth pressed too close. A wedding coordinator entered. It's time, she said. Lena nodded, but her feet remained rooted to the carpet. Her pulse pounded. Her throat tightened. The room suddenly felt too small. Lena? Grant asked. She inhaled sharply, forcing her spine straight. Yes, she whispered. Let's do it. But a hollow feeling echoed inside her chest like a warning. Downstairs, Evan stepped out of the elevator on the mezzanine level where the Oratech event was being held. Soft jazz drifted from the hall. Investors chatted in small clusters. A banner welcomed the acquisition team. He should have walked inside. Instead, he paused near the balcony railing overlooking the grand lobby below. A line of bridesmaids in soft champagne gowns walked across the foyer toward the main ballroom. Photographers flashed. Guests murmured. Everything moved with practiced elegance. Evan watched only for a moment, only long enough for memory to brush against him, not long enough to sting. Just as he turned to leave, someone called his name. Evan? Evan Carter? He blinked, startled. A woman in a navy dress approached him. Margaret Hale, Sabrina's mother, one of Lena's old social circle acquaintances. She had once invited Evan to dinners where he felt small without knowing why. Now she looked at him with stunned recognition. My goodness, she murmured. You look different. He offered a polite smile. Good to see you, Mrs. Hale. What are you doing here? She asked. I have an event upstairs, work-related. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the wedding hall. Do you know about today? Yes, he said simply. She studied him with the sharp curiosity of someone recalculating every assumption she had ever made. And the article, she added, is that true? Yes. I see. Her voice wavered with something like guilt or something like fascination. Well, Congratulations. Thank you. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but a bridesmaid called for her. She excused herself, leaving Evan alone again. He exhaled, finally turning toward the Oratech reception. But that was when he heard it. A gasp, then a whisper that rippled across the lobby like wind through glass. It's him. The ex-husband. That's Evan Carter. He froze, and when he turned, he realized why the whispers grew louder. Lena had stepped out of the elevator. On the opposite side of the mezzanine, surrounded by bridesmaids, veil trailing behind her, bouquet trembling softly in her hands. She hadn't seen him yet, but the guests below did, the bridesmaids did, even the hotel staff did. Then she lifted her gaze. Their eyes locked. Everything the years together, the slow decay of their marriage, the final arguments, the harsh words collapsed into a single silent moment. Lena's breath hitched. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. No, something worse. She had seen the life she could have had, and the man she had underestimated. Evan didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He didn't tighten his jaw or cross his arms or fill the silence with anger. He simply stood there calm, quietly composed, wholly himself. For the first time, Lena didn't see the man she left. She saw the man who had healed without her. Her fingers loosened around the bouquet. One white rose slipped from the arrangement and fell to the floor, landing softly near her feet. Behind her, a bridesmaid called her name. But Lena couldn't move. Evan inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not invitation, then turned toward the Oratech hall. He didn't wait for her reaction. He didn't need to. The sound of his footsteps faded. Lena's world, however, had just unraveled. The moment Evan disappeared into the Oratech ballroom, the air around Lena seemed to collapse inward. A dizzying pressure pulsed in her chest, as if her heart were suddenly too large for her ribs. The bridesmaids whispered urgently, unsure whether to touch her or give her space. "Lena?" Sabrina stepped closer. "Hey, look at me. Are you okay?" Lena didn't answer. She couldn't. All she could see was the silhouette retreating through those doors. The man she had dismissed. The man she had betrayed. The man she had spent months assuring herself she was better off without. He looked nothing like the version she remembered. No insecurity in his stance. No hesitation in his eyes. No heaviness in his shoulders. He had become someone else. Someone stronger, quieter, more composed. And she realized with a sting that she had never truly known him at all. A wedding coordinator approached nervously. "We're late. Guests are waiting." Sabrina tightened her hold on the veil. "We'll be right there." But Lena still hadn't moved. Her pulse hammered in her ears like a warning she wished she didn't understand. Finally, she inhaled slowly. One breath, then another. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice shook. "Let's go." It was a lie, but it was the only one she could cling to. Downstairs, the string quartet began playing the opening notes of the processional. The guests rose quietly, heads turning toward the grand double doors. Cameras were raised, smiles widened. Grant stood at the altar, hands clasped tightly in front of him. His tuxedo was impeccable, but there was a sudden rigidity in the way he held himself. He had sensed a shift the moment he saw his future mother-in-law whispering urgently to Sabrina near the aisle entrance, and the whispers among the guests only heightened his unease. That's the ex. The one who built that tech. Have you seen the article? Awkward timing. I heard he looks incredible, now totally different. Grant clenched his jaw. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not today. Not on the day he needed to project strength while his business teetered on a ledge. He kept scanning the back of the room, waiting for the doors to open. Waiting for Lena. Waiting too long. Upstairs, Lena finally reached the top of the grand staircase leading down to the ballroom entrance. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if gravity itself resisted her. She held her bouquet too tightly, petals trembling under her grip. Sabrina whispered, "If you're not ready." "I am," Lena said quickly. Too quickly. But she couldn't admit what she truly felt. That when she saw Evan, something inside her fractured. Not because she still loved him, not because she wanted him back, but because she realized she had been blinded by ambition, ego, and insecurity disguised as desire. She had told herself Evan wasn't enough. But what if it was she who had been lacking? The question lodged like a splinter beneath her ribs. The double doors swung open. Music swelled. All eyes rose. Lena stepped forward. From the altar, Grant saw her appear at the top of the aisle, framed by white roses and warm golden light. She looked ethereal exactly as he had hoped, exactly as the photographers needed. But something was wrong. Her pace was too slow, her expression too pale, her eyes unfocused. She walked like someone who had just seen a ghost, or a truth. Grant's stomach twisted. As she drew closer, he forced a smile, extending his hand. She placed hers in his automatically, but her fingers were cold. Her gaze flickered across the room as if searching for someone, as if she expected Evan to still be there. Grant noticed. The smile on his face hardened ever so slightly. The ceremony began. Words flowed, vows, readings, promises, but Lena heard nothing. Her thoughts spun relentlessly. How did he change so much? Why didn't he become that man when he was with me? Was it me who held him back? Why does it hurt to know he's thriving without me? She tried to silence these questions, but they kept echoing through the chambers of her mind. When the officiant asked her to repeat her vows, her voice faltered. Just once. Enough that a few guests exchanged looks. Grant squeezed her hand, smiling tightly, whispering, "Focus." She swallowed and continued, but her eyes were glassy, far away. Meanwhile, in the Oratech ballroom, Evan stood near a table with a glass of sparkling water. Executives congratulated him. Investors introduced themselves. Industry leaders praised his work. He smiled politely, listened attentively, and answered questions with slow, deliberate clarity. But every so often, just for a moment, his gaze drifted toward the hallway, toward the wedding happening on the other side of the wall, toward a life he had already left behind. He didn't regret coming. He didn't regret seeing her. And he didn't regret walking away. The strange part was how little it hurt. The ache he had expected never came. Instead, there was a clean, steady emptiness, a release. He didn't belong in that world anymore. And he realized he never had. Back in the wedding hall, the officiant finally said, "You may exchange rings." Grant took Lena's trembling hand. "Hey," he whispered through clenched teeth, smiling for the cameras, "get it together." The words were soft enough for only her to hear, but sharp enough to slice. Lena blinked, startled. "I'm trying," she whispered. But Grant's grip tightened. "Whatever you saw up there, let it go," he muttered. Her breath caught. He knew. He didn't know exactly, but he knew enough. The ring slipped onto her finger. Her ring slipped onto his. The officiant lifted his hands. If anyone has any reason these two should not be, Lena's heart seized. Grant's jaw tensed. The guests held their breath. No one spoke. The officiant continued, "Let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Silence. Deep, echoing silence. But in that silence, Lena felt something crack inside her, not loud enough for the guests to hear, but loud enough for her to feel the tremor in her bones. The officiant smiled. "Then by the power vested in me." But before he could finish, a sudden commotion stirred near the back of the room. A hotel staff member hurried down the aisle toward the coordinator, whispering urgently. The coordinator's face went pale. Eyes darted to the groom. Grant stiffened. Lena felt the shift instantly. Whatever was happening, it was about him, and it was about to hit the ceremony like a storm. The whisper between the coordinator and the hotel staff grew into a tremor that rippled across the room. Though the officiant continued speaking, the guests' attention drifted, eyes narrowing, necks craning, curiosity prickling through the air like static. Lena sensed it before she understood it. Something was wrong. Terribly, undeniably wrong. Grant's hand tightened around hers, fingers locking like a trap. His smile stayed in place, perfect for photographs, perfect for show, but beneath the surface, the expression twisted with fear. The coordinator stepped closer to the couple, her face drained of color. "Mr. Wallace," she whispered urgently, leaning just close enough for them to hear, "you need to speak with the hotel manager immediately. It's important." Grant's jaw clenched. "Tell him I'll speak with him after the ceremony." "He says it cannot wait." The coordinator swallowed. He used the word emergency. A murmur spread among the nearest guests. Lena's pulse quickened. "Grant?" she whispered. His hand slipped from hers. "Stay here." She grabbed his wrist before she even realized she had moved. "What's going on?" Grant inhaled sharply, anger flickering in his eyes. "Nothing that concerns you." The words stung. So did the coldness. But more than that, the familiarity. She had heard that tone from Evan once, at the very end, when she had already broken him. But Grant's version carried none of the tenderness Evan once held, just impatience and panic. Grant turned to follow the coordinator toward the back. The guests watched openly now, whispering freely, "Is something wrong? What happened? I heard his business is in trouble. Are they stopping the wedding?" Every word tightened the vice around Lena's chest. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll pause for a brief moment." But his voice faded as Grant disappeared through the side doors with the hotel staff. Grant stepped into a private corridor off the ballroom, the music muffled behind him. The hotel manager stood waiting, stiff posture, hands clasped tightly, eyes apologetic. "Mr. Wallace," the manager began, "we've received a notification regarding your payment authorization for the venue." Grant groaned. "This again? I told your staff my transfer is pending." "Yes," the manager said slowly. "The bank contacted us directly. The transfer did not fail, it was rejected. Your accounts are frozen." Ice shot through Grant's veins. "No," he snapped. "There's a mistake." The manager shook his head. The message was explicit. A pending investigation. Your accounts and all associated business accounts are under temporary freeze. Grant's breath choked. It felt like the hallway narrowed around him, closing in. Frozen accounts. In the middle of a wedding, with a ballroom full of wealthy, high-profile guests. The manager continued gently. "We cannot proceed without confirmed payment." Grant's vision blurred. "Are you saying, I'm afraid the venue cannot legally continue hosting the ceremony?" Grant's knees nearly buckled. His entire world, built on deals, illusions, and carefully curated success, had chosen this exact moment to collapse. Back in the ballroom, tension thickened until it became almost physical. Lena stood at the altar, bouquet trembling in her hands, while guests murmured louder and louder. Sabrina hurried to the front. "Are you okay? What did they say?" "I don't know," Lena whispered. "He wouldn't tell me." Her voice shook, her chest tightened, because she did know. Not the details, but the sensation. The dread. The instability. The sinking realization that something foundational had cracked. She had felt this before. Once, in a small apartment with outdated furniture, and a man she used to love telling her he needed time after losing his job. But this felt different, bigger, darker, and dangerously public. The double doors opened again. Grant re-emerged pale, sweating, the mask of confidence shattered. His bow tie was crooked now, hands shaking as he wiped sweat from his forehead. The whispers exploded. "He looks awful." "What happened?" "Did something fall through?" "Is the wedding off?" Lena stepped forward. "Grant," he avoided her eyes, "we need to talk." They moved to the corner of the ballroom, though privacy was impossible now. Dozens of eyes watched. The quartet had gone silent. Even the flowers seemed to hold their breath. When he finally looked at her, his expression was a mixture of rage and humiliation. "The hotel wants payment," he said through clenched teeth. "My accounts are frozen." "What? Why?" Her voice trembled. He shook his head. "Some audit. Some irregular activity. I don't know, but they're shutting us down." Panic stabbed her. "Grant, what do we do?" "I'm handling it," he snapped. "But stop," he hissed quietly. "Stop talking." Her breath caught. That tone, that reprimand, the same one he used at home when she asked too many questions about his late-night business calls. He rubbed his temples. "Just stand there and look composed." She stared at him, shocked. Composed. He still cared about appearances more than her panic, more than the wedding, more than the truth unraveling around them. Lena felt something small, sharp crack inside her. In the mezzanine, outside the Oratech ballroom, Evan stepped out to take a call from Mia. The hallway buzzed with conference chatter, muted and professional. He didn't notice the sudden swarm of wedding guests spilling into the foyer until a cluster of them nearly collided with him. "Is it really canceled?" "They say the groom's finances imploded. This is catastrophic." "Imagine the embarrassment." Evan paused. He didn't mean to listen. He didn't want to be part of this. But then he heard her name. Poor Lena. She looks like she might faint. And her ex-husband showed up today of all days. Honestly, maybe this is karma. Evan closed his eyes briefly. He didn't wish this on her. Not humiliation. Not public collapse. Not pain. He didn't want to witness her downfall. He didn't want to be anywhere near it. But fate, it seemed, had woven their stories together one last time. Back in the ballroom, the officiant awkwardly lowered his script. The guests whispered louder. The hotel staff stood clustered near the entrance, waiting. Finally, the hotel manager stepped forward and spoke the words that snapped the room in half. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that due to an unresolved payment issue, the event cannot continue." A collective gasp filled the space. Grant stood frozen. Lena's bouquet slipped from her hands. Petals scattered across the marble floor. The wedding, her carefully crafted future, was collapsing in front of 100 witnesses. And somewhere above her, on the mezzanine, Evan stood still, unaware that he would be drawn back into the storm before the day was over. The ballroom erupted, voices rising, chairs scraping, guests pulling out their phones as the disaster unfolded in real time. Some whispered in sympathy, others in thinly veiled fascination. A select few recorded discreet videos, hungry for a scandal they could replay later like a guilty pleasure. Among the chaos, Lena stood motionless at the center of the room, her veil trembling like a fragile wing caught in a storm. Her eyes were fixed on the petals scattered at her feet, the ones she had dropped when the truth shattered through the ceremony. The bouquet had fallen. Her composure had fallen. Her future was falling. Sabrina rushed to her side. "Lena, we need to get you out of here." But Lena couldn't move. Her legs felt rooted to the marble, as if leaving the spot would force her to acknowledge what had just happened. The guests' whispers grew sharper. "I knew something was off with him." "Did you see his face?" "Freezing accounts? That's serious." "She must be mortified." "Imagine the headlines." Lena swallowed a sob. This wasn't a private collapse. This was public disintegration. And the city she tried so hard to impress was watching every fracture. Grant stormed toward her, eyes wild, sweat beading at his temples. "We're going," he growled under his breath. Lena flinched. "Grant, what happened? Tell me the truth." "Not here," he snapped. "Not in front of them." "Then where, Grant? Our wedding is—" "Don't say another word," he hissed, jaw rigid. "We are leaving." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit, but one of the groomsmen stepped forward instinctively. "Hey man, easy," he murmured. "She's shaken." Grant's glare snapped toward him, blazing with humiliation and fury. "Stay out of this." Lena pulled her arm back, voice trembling. "Grant, stop. We're not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." His expression twisted. For a heartbeat, he looked almost feral-cornered, desperate. "My accounts were frozen," he choked out. "My company is under investigation for misreported assets. This," he gestured at the ruined ceremony, "is collateral damage." Lena's breath hitched. "Investigation? Grant, what did you do?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a menacing whisper. "Do you think this is the time to interrogate me?" Her fear flickered. Not of the situation, of him. Something she had never allowed herself to admit before. Across the mezzanine, Evan emerged from the Oratech conference hall, phone pressed to his ear as Mia finished updating him on logistics for the upcoming product integration. He thanked her, ended the call, then froze as he glanced over the railing. The ballroom below was a scene of unraveling spectacle. Guests scattered, staff argued, cameras flashed like lightning, and in the middle, Lena, pale, staggering, holding her own arms as though trying to keep herself from breaking apart. Evan exhaled, not in triumph, not in satisfaction, but in something closer to quiet disbelief. He hadn't come to witness this. He never wanted to. A wedding was supposed to be a sanctuary of hope, even if that hope wasn't his. But what he saw wasn't a wedding. It was a disaster wearing a white dress. He should walk away. He almost turned to do exactly that. But then he saw Grant gripping Lena's wrist again, pulling her with an authority that made something deep in Evan's chest tighten. Not jealousy, not love, just the human instinct that rises when someone sees a cruelty they can't ignore. Inside the ballroom, Grant continued pulling Lena toward the door. "We're leaving. Right now." "Grant, stop, please," Lena protested, her voice cracking under the pressure. Sabrina stepped in. "She doesn't want to go with you." "This is my fiancée," Grant barked. "Back off." "She looks terrified," Sabrina countered. "Back off." A tension snapped in Grant's jaw. He didn't like being challenged, not by women, not publicly, and especially not when his world was falling apart. He yanked Lena's arm again, and that was when a voice, steady, calm, impossibly familiar, cut through the chaos. "Let her go." The room froze. Even the whispers fell silent. Lena's breath hitched as she turned. Evan stood in the doorway of the ballroom, tall, composed, framed by the warm light behind him. His tuxedo was immaculate, his expression unreadable. He wasn't imposing. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't here to cause a scene. He was simply there. But his presence changed everything. Grant straightened, eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" Sabrina answered before Lena could speak. "Her ex-husband." Gasps, a wave of murmurs. Someone whispered, "That's him." Grant let out a harsh laugh. Of course. The failure. Evan didn't react. He didn't flinch. He didn't shrink. He simply repeated with the same calm authority, "Let her go." Grant smirked. "Or what? You think showing up in a tux makes you relevant again?" Lena's stomach dropped. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to shrink. But Evan didn't respond with anger or pride. His voice stayed steady, almost gentle. "This isn't about me," he said. "Or you. She clearly doesn't want to go with you. That's enough." Grant's fingers tightened on Lena's wrist. Evan stepped forward, slow, deliberate, not threatening, but unshakably present. "Let her go," he said again, more firmly this time. For a split second, the men stared at each other. Grant's face reddened. He looked between Evan, the guests, the phone's recording, and Lena's terrified expression. And in that moment, all of Grant's arrogance collapsed. He released her. Lena stumbled back into Sabrina's arms, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Grant shoved a hand through his hair and turned away, cursing under his breath as hotel security approached to escort him out for a private conversation. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence that followed wasn't celebratory. It was stunned, fragile, almost reverent. After a breath, Evan turned to leave. He wasn't here to reclaim her. He wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He wasn't here to stay. He came because someone needed help, and he was capable of giving it. As he stepped toward the door, Lena found her voice thin, trembling, breaking on the edges. "Evan, wait." He paused, but he didn't turn around. Not yet. Not until she whispered the words she had been holding back for far too long. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked on the last syllable. Slowly, Evan turned to face her. She stood there, veil crooked, mascara smudged, heart shattered in front of a room full of witnesses. For the first time in her life, she looked small. His gaze softened, not with affection, but with understanding. "I know," he said softly. "But you don't owe me anything anymore." Lena's eyes filled again. "Then why did you step in?" Evan's expression held the same calm that had unsettled her at the mezzanine. "Because the version of me you knew would have walked away." A pause. "But I'm not him anymore." Silence spread through the room, slow, heavy, transformative. Lena's breath trembled. "Will you stay? Just for a minute?" Evan held her gaze for a long moment, then gently shook his head. "No," he said. "Today isn't my day." He stepped back, with quiet dignity, with peace, with a freedom she had never seen in him. And as he walked out of the ballroom, passing the guests, the ruined flowers, the collapsed fantasy, Lena felt the full weight of what she had lost. Not a millionaire, not a success story. She had lost the man who healed without her, the man she had broken, and who, in the end, saved her from breaking any further. Evan left the hotel without looking back.